Tonight on Bridge City News, the City of Lethbridge is looking for public input as it creates a new affordable housing strategy. We have details of where and when the city's Remembrance Day ceremonies are taking place on Sunday. And we will have the conclusion of our documentary, Fighting for Ezekiel, including final thoughts from parents David and Colette Stephan. Good evening. Thanks so much for joining us. This Sunday is a very special day. It's a day we remember those who fought and died for the freedoms we enjoy today. The City of Lethbridge has a special Remembrance Day ceremony taking place. It goes from 9:30 till 11:30 a.m. at Exhibition Park in the South Pavilion. The event then moves to the Lethbridge Cenotaph outside of City Hall from 12 till 12:30 p.m. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, who's on his way to France for Remembrance Day, recently apologized on behalf of the Canadian government for an event which occurred almost 80 years ago. The MS St. Louis, which was a boat filled with 907 German Jews, was turned away from Canadian shores by then Prime Minister Mackenzie King. Our parliamentary reporter Ray Fillion explains in more detail as to what happened.
They were seeking refuge in North America. The captain first took the ship to Cuba, then to the United States. They were denied the possibility to dock there, so they tried their luck in Halifax. And the Canadian Prime Minister at the time, Mackenzie King, wouldn't allow the ship to dock in Nova Scotia. So what ended up happening is the ship had to go back to Europe, where some 254 of the passengers ended up dying in the Holocaust.
Catch my full interview with Monsieur Fillion discussing some of the biggest stories from the Hill, including the sexting scandal involving former Tory MP Tony Clement. That's coming up in the second half of our program. Federal Tory leader Andrew Scheer says he was shocked at hearing that former Tory MP Tony Clement's sexting was not an isolated incident.
I took him at his word that this was an isolated incident. In the hours that followed, there were numerous reports of activity that were serious in nature, and so Tony and I spoke and agreed that it would be best for him to respond to these allegations from outside of caucus. So I have heard from Tony that he was the victim of extortion. I don't have any official information from the RCMP or from the National Security Agencies, so I would have to refer you to them as to that part of the situation.
Closer to home, the City of Lethbridge is looking for public input as it is creating a new housing strategy. City officials are inviting residents to a community workshop on housing needs and priorities for Lethbridge. It takes place November 21st, 6 till 9 o'clock at the Coast Lethbridge Hotel. The task force is being chaired by Councillor Belinda Croson and includes Mayor Chris Spearman. The strategy is expected to be completed by March of 2019. The NDP government wants to invest over $200 million over 2 years. It's in an act to combat poverty and fight for Albertans with disabilities. If passed, the legislation would come into effect on January 1st, 2019. Nearly 250,000 Albertans would qualify for funding. Lethbridge is at risk of losing nearly 1/4 of its public trees. Now that's according to David Ellis, Parks Manager for the City of Lethbridge. He says that emerald ash borer beetles could invade our forests. The beetles are not here yet, but he would like to be prepared for when they do.
It's more a question of when than if. We don't know when, but I think it's bound to show up. There's no need to be concerned with the beetle yet. When it gets here, we hope we're in a position to be able to provide the education for homeowners so that they can take action on their own trees.
Ellis is estimating the beetles would cause nearly $6 million in damage. The McMahon Youth Community and Family Service Organization in Lethbridge is preparing for a very special event. Project Connect is a biannual initiative to get service providers and resources under one roof for families and individuals in need. The group has partnered with the City of Lethbridge this year to collect items today.
We always have some amazing stories come out of Project Connect, some success stories. And I mean, one of our biggest success stories that we have is we have a participant who has come through Project Connect multiple times in the beginning and now is a volunteer at Project Connect because they believe so much in the event itself. And so when you're able to connect 500 plus people to immediate resources and do that follow-up with them where they're able to get connected further, the mitigation of other crises is amazing, just to see everybody come together. And then you have 60 agencies coordinating and cooperating under one roof. It's just super powerful.
Donations will be accepted until 8:30 tonight, with a strong need for winter toques, mittens, and other warm items for the winter. From loonies to debit, Visa to Bitcoin, we all rely on payment networks. Israeli entrepreneur Sar Wolf says he hopes his attempt at creating a modern payment system reaches more than 10% of the world by the year 2023.
And we hope somewhere around 10 years to be able to become a global network, which is accepted everywhere. The problem is that many people wanted to create a new payment network, including myself 20 years ago, and we all failed because it's very hard to bring buyers when there are no sellers, hard to bring sellers when there are no buyers. So it's very hard to create a new network. That's why we're stuck with very old technologies in payments. So the idea of Q is to create a payment network with its own currency, a new currency. And if we're successful, that currency, according to monetary economics models, will be worth quite a lot. And you distribute that currency to everyone that joins early, that brings their friends, that downloads an app. Anyone who promotes the adoption of the network gets free currency. And by that, you allow the network to grow and gain critical mass, and also create wide adoption for the currency.
Initiative Q has offered free Qs to those who sign up for the next 12 days and invite their friends to do the same. The Southern Alberta couple getting a retrial in the death of their son is seeking monetary help. David and Colette Stephan say they are broke and are seeking financial assistance through legal aid. The couple say the first trial cost them close to $1 million, including the loss of their house. The couple was found guilty following the original trial in 2016 of failing to provide the necessaries of life for their 19-month-old son Ezekiel, who died in 2012 of meningitis. David received a 4-month sentence in jail, and Colette was given 3 months of house arrest. The Supreme Court said the Stephans deserved a new trial because the trial judge did not properly instruct jurors. The new trial is set to run for 4 weeks beginning June 3rd. The Stephans, who were tried by judge and jury in 2016, have decided to be tried this time by judge alone. Bridge City News shared exclusive interviews with the Stephans, friends, medical and legal experts in our 5-part special, Fighting for Ezekiel. We have heard stories of medical misadventure, missing medical files, conflicting testimonies, and improperly equipped ambulances. In tonight's conclusion, we will hear some final thoughts from David and Colette. We will also hear from legal and medical experts concerning the significance of this case and how to recognize the symptoms of meningitis.
They may not be able to recognize that the child had bacterial meningitis, but they should recognize that the child is actually quite ill.
I really believe that Dave and Colette did their very best. They did what they thought was best for their child.
It's very hard to overturn a jury verdict unless, and this is a big point, the jury charge was unfair.
What we're doing here is helping to uphold parental rights, people's choice to natural health supplements that's coming under attack.
Watch for the conclusion of Fighting for Ezekiel after business news. And if you miss parts 1 through 4, you can view the entire series online at bridgecitynews.ca. A Transportation Safety Board investigator says it appears a bad storm may have been a factor causing a cargo plane to overrun a Halifax runway by 210 meters, causing the injuries of 4 crew members.
The aircraft was on a flight from Chicago O'Hare International Airport from the United States to here in Halifax Stanfield International Airport. There was 4 crew members on board. There was no passengers. There was no cargo on board the aircraft. There were reports of minor injuries of the 4 crew members, and the aircraft was substantially damaged. There were strong westerly winds at 18 knots, which is approximately 33 kilometers an hour. It was raining at the time of the occurrence. The aircraft struck a localizer antenna during the overrun, and it landed with the gear collapsing, two engines separated, and the aircraft remaining engines were substantially damaged.
None of the 82 Canadians aboard a Toronto-bound flight were injured after a Fly Jamaica plane made an emergency landing and skidded off the runway in Georgetown, Guyana. One passenger reported a hydraulics problem.
We got on the runway, taxied the runway, and then we took off and flew in the sky for about 15 minutes. The captain announced there's some hydraulic issue or hydraulic problem. You got to turn back. So then I noticed it was like making some funny turns in the sky, like some S shape and some circles. So I figured he was dumping the fuel in the Atlantic Ocean. So then eventually we came back now. We landed, the wheels touched down, everything was nice. The reverse thrusters kicked in, but the brakes on the tires were not up or applied. They were like just freewheeling. And the runway was extended recently, and we were at the end of the runway, and they had these big spikes in the ground to stop to burst your tires. And I heard the tires popping, 2 or 3 tires, I can't remember if it was 2 or 3, bursting. Then the plane swerved to the right, and the right wing was actually flapping, and it ripped part away from the main fuselage. And then the engine actually rotated 90 degrees the other opposite direction. And then we went through a fence, like a chain link fence, and we stopped at the edge of a cliff, which is like a 30, 40 feet drop, a straight drop down.
Northern California firefighters say a fast-moving wildfire destroyed more than 2,000 structures. The 27,000 residents of Paradise, California were told to evacuate as the blaze burned more than 70 square kilometers. Witnesses reported seeing homes, businesses, schools, and a retirement home go up in flames. Officials say the fire has not yet been contained. Investigators were seen outside of the home of California bar shooting suspect Ian David Long. Neighbors described the former Marine who shot and killed 12 people at a country music bar as distant and someone who always fought with his mother. Long spent 5 years in the military. He was honorably discharged with the rank of corporal in 2013. He was part of the infantry responsible for hauling and shooting machine guns. Friends, neighbors, and politicians react to the shooting at the bar in Thousand Oaks, California. One person described the shooting suspect Long as someone who liked to be alone.
He was, the way I saw him, as an introvert, and he liked to be by himself, and
it's a heavy heart. You come here a day or two after an election for governor, you want to be focused on other things. 23 folks injured, and obviously 13 lives in total lost. And it's, this is America. It's got to change. This doesn't happen anywhere else on planet Earth. And we can't let folks forget that. Can't lose sight of that. Can't allow this to be normalized.
Jason Kaufman broke out in tears as he told reporters that authorities told him his oldest son, Cody Kaufman, was killed in the mass shooting at that bar in Thousand Oaks, California.
His name was Cody Kaufman, my firstborn son. Only him and I know how much I love, how much I miss. Oh, God, this is so... Oh, son, I love you so much. Oh, Heavenly Father, just please.
What would you like us to know about Cody?
Oh, Cody was the big brother that my kids need. I have a daughter coming on the 29th of this month that he was so excited to have his first sister. And not, now she'll never know.
Bridge City News has also learned that one of the victims from the California bar shooting is a man who survived the mass shooting in Las Vegas earlier this year. 27-year-old Telemachus Orfanos died alongside of 11 others at the Borderline Country Bar in Thousand Oaks outside of Los Angeles. Every year, 4-H kids prepare animals for a show, and every year there's a time to say goodbye. Jordan Lampo met with a young ambassador who has a love for sheep.
I love the whole inclusive environment, so like no matter kind of what 4-H event you're at, everyone is willing to help each other out and include them and give each other tips. I love the friendships that you create from it, as well as all the life skills that you gain throughout.
17-year-old St. Jerome grade 12 student Ashley Cobier joined 4-H when she was 9. Overall, she's been raising sheep for 10 years. It's become more than just a 4-H project.
So we lamb in April, and then you give them all their immunizations and make sure they're healthy. You keep them for a couple months with their mom, and then we will wean them. And at that point, you pick your 4-H lambs and separate them, and you train them, wash them, get them ready for show. At the end of your 4-H year, you sell your market project and then keep your ewe lambs. And then after that, in the summer, they just graze in pasture. And then now getting them ready for winter, give them a little bit extra hay, or we'll give them some grain ration before they get bred.
There are challenges like illnesses to watch out for.
Some of them are simple, like ORF is really common on our lambs. So we just give them salt blocks, and then as they lick the salt, it kind of clears up. For other illnesses, we just give them a needle.
Ashley is one of 4 ambassadors who represent 4-H in northeastern Alberta. Still, one of the biggest challenges is how attached 4-Hers get to their animals, knowing that they will be going to market.
I feel like most people don't realize how much of a pet that farm animals can be, especially within 4-H. You spend so much time with them, training them, walking them, washing them. So they definitely do become like your own little dog. I know my lamb this year followed me around as if it was a little puppy. So you definitely get attached to them.
And every year there's the difficulty of letting go.
Beautiful animals, aren't they? A cloudy but slightly warmer day in Lethbridge today with lots of wind. And there's more snow on the way, just in time for the weekend. I'll have complete weather details coming up shortly. It was mainly overcast today. Tonight, a good chance of flurries developing with a low near -2. Tomorrow, slight chance of snow again with a high near +1. Remembrance Day Sunday, flurries again with a mercury dropping to -2. The clouds should clear on Monday, bringing us lots of sunshine and a high near 0. Tuesday, mainly sunny again with a high near 6 degrees. A low pressure system returns on Wednesday, bringing more clouds and a high of only 4. Looking at the almanac, the average high for this time of year is 6 degrees and an average low of -6. The highest temperature on this date was recorded in 1987 at 18 degrees, and the record low was -28 in 1945. Sunrise was at 7:33, sunset at 4:57. Let's have a look at tomorrow's temperatures across the country. Clearing in Vancouver on Saturday with a high near 8. Victoria partly cloudy with a high of 9. Calgary a mixture of sun and cloud and a high of +1. Edmonton had a freezing rain warning today. Tomorrow, rain mixed with snow and a high of only -2. Light snow expected in Regina tomorrow with a high of -6. Overcast and -7 is on tap for Saskatoon. Flurries and -7 for Winnipeg tomorrow. Over in the central part of the country, a good chance of flurries and +2 is expected in Toronto. Flurries and 0 for Ottawa. Montreal will have rain mixed with snow and 4. Fredericton, New Brunswick will have showers and 7. Halifax, Nova Scotia will have thunder showers and 14. Charlottetown, PEI will have rain and 13. And at St. John's, Newfoundland, they're expecting snow and a high of +3 for tomorrow. A controversial plan by Stats Canada to access the banking information of Canadians has been put on hold. The Senate committee was told the project will not proceed until the Federal Privacy Commissioner has finished his work and Canadians' privacy concerns have been addressed. Stats Canada recently caught 9 financial institutions off guard by asking them to share the private banking information of 500,000 Canadians. The government agency says it would help improve its data collection efforts. The plan triggered public complaints and opposition party allegations of state surveillance and authoritarian rule. As some farmers in Alberta are still bringing in the crops, those in Saskatchewan have finished bringing in theirs. The province's final crop report shows 99% of the crop is off the fields. Snow and rain in early November has delayed the harvest of the remaining crops such as flax and oats, but producers hope to be back in the fields once it improves. Although the weather made for a tough harvest, the report suggests crop quality was average to above average. Overall yields are on par with the 10-year average. U.S. President Donald Trump is calling a U.S. federal court order blocking his administration's permit for construction of the Trans-Canada Keystone XL pipeline a disgrace. A judge in Montana says the U.S. government's analysis did not fully study the effects of greenhouse gas emissions or the potential for oil spills. Environmentalists cheered after the project was put on hold to allow more time for an environmental review. Trump predicts the ruling will be appealed. TransCanada says the company has received the ruling and is currently reviewing it. Uno, Magic 8 Ball, and Pinball have made it into the National Toy Hall of Fame. The 3 have been inducted in recognition of their staying power and influence. The honorees were chosen from a field of 12 finalists that included American Girl dolls, Chalk, Tic-Tac-Toe, and Tickle Me Elmo. That was one of my favorites. This year's inductees will be on permanent display at the Hall of Fame, located inside the Strong Museum in Rochester, New York. Now, here's a look at today's markets. Recapping one of our top stories this hour, the City of Lethbridge Remembrance Day ceremony goes Sunday, 9:30 till 11:30 a.m. at Exhibition Park in the South Pavilion. The event then moves on to the Lethbridge Cenotaph outside of City Hall from noon till 12:30. When you see news happening, drop us an email at info@bridgecitynews.ca. And if you missed any of today's top stories, check out our full newscast online at bridgecitynews.ca. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is heading to France for Remembrance Day. Our parliamentary reporter Ray Felion has details next. But first, here's a look what's happening in and around your community.
Here's your Bridge City News community calendar. Mom and Pop's Garage Sale is taking place Saturday, November 10th from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. at Emmanuel Lutheran Church. Come shop with local parents selling new and used kids' items such as clothing, toys, baby gear, and more. Tables are available to anyone in the community for $25. To sign up for your table, call Michelle at 493-634-6565. And for more information, visit emmanuellutheran.ca. The City of Lethbridge Remembrance Day ceremonies will be taking place Sunday, November 11th from 9:30 to 11:30 a.m. at Exhibition Park South Pavilion, and from noon to 12:30 p.m. at the Lethbridge Cenotaph outside City Hall. Come out in support of our veterans and to remember the sacrifice many made for our freedom. The Downtown BRZ is looking for volunteers to assist with the 18th annual Bright Lights Festival being held on Friday, November 16th. Volunteers are needed to help with a variety of activities, including visits with Santa, hay rides, snowboard demonstrations, food prep, and more. For information, call Shiva at 403-327-9002 or visit downtownlethbridge.com. And that's your Bridge City News community calendar.
A big story which has been making headlines is longtime Conservative MP Tony Clement being kicked out of his party's caucus for inappropriate behavior, including sexting or sending sexually explicit images and video of himself to other people. Joining me now from Ottawa via Skype is our parliamentary reporter Ray Felion. Ray, this must be tough not only for Mr. Clement's family, I mean this guy's married, but for his Conservative family and his constituents as well.
Oh, absolutely. And it's really hard to see how a guy like Tony Clement can recover from something like this. I mean, it was a shock for everybody, Conservatives, reporters, the general public and his constituency also north of Toronto. I mean, how can a guy who's 57 years old, married, an experienced politician, you know, he was a cabinet minister in Stephen Harper's government. Prior to entering federal politics, he was a cabinet minister at the provincial level here in Ontario. How can a guy like this end up being caught like that in a case of sextortion is how they call it, you know, when you post naked photos of yourself online and people are trying to exploit that for money. They contact you saying, you give us in Mr. Clement's case, 50,000 euros or $75,000 Canadian if you don't want those photos to be published. I mean, we tell our kids, you know, children and teenagers, do not do that. Do not put naked photos of yourself online in any way, shape, or form. I mean, and this time it's a former cabinet minister, a member of parliament who gets caught like that. At first, when the story surfaced on Tuesday, Mr. Scheer, his leader, said it was okay that for Mr. Clement to stay on within the Conservative Party caucus because he thought it was a one-off. But it quickly became apparent that it wasn't an isolated incident. Within hours, some women started complaining on social media. Hey, I'm in my early 20s, and in the middle of the night, Tony Clement checks out my profile on Instagram. He likes many of my photos. Some women called it creepy. So after a few hours, Mr. Scheer announced on Wednesday afternoon, no, he asked Mr. Clement to resign, which he did. So he's out of the Conservative Party. He's now going to be sitting as an independent MP.
Now, Tony Clement says he's seeking professional help. Is his political career really over then, Ray? What are your thoughts?
I think so. I mean, he's going to stay on until the next election. By all accounts, he doesn't look like he's going to be resigning his seat. But as I said off the top, it's really hard to see how his political career could recover after such a big lapse in judgment. And Mr. Clement published a lengthy letter to his constituents on Thursday afternoon in which he admits that it wasn't an isolated incident. In fact, last summer, a woman was apparently offered money so she could share some intimate photos that she apparently had of Mr. Clement. It says, and I'm going to quote here from Mr. Clement's letter, he said that during a period of personal difficulty and weakness, I engaged in inappropriate exchanges that crossed lines that should never have been crossed. These exchanges led to acts of infidelity. One inappropriate exchange led to a woman being offered money by an anonymous social media account in exchange for the disclosure of intimate and personal information. Mr. Clement says he went to the OPP about this last summer. And on Thursday afternoon, his former leader, Andrew Scheer, said he was shocked that he had never heard about this. So very, very embarrassing. And as you said, he's a married man, so he's got trouble, serious troubles to deal with at home following this story, which is embarrassing for everyone.
And Ray, like you mentioned as well, Tony Clement has been a high-profile Tory MP for a very long time in the Harper government as a minister. Now, with him sexting out these photos and these videos, was that an issue of national security as well?
Well, yeah, there's that aspect too, because Mr. Clement, up until Tuesday evening, sat on a committee of MP, a very secretive committee here in the nation's capital that had access to top secret information about national security data as well. So there were questions being asked around Parliament Hill whether or not in this whole sexting case, whether or not some of that information could have been compromised. According to the public safety minister who was asked about it on Wednesday, that doesn't appear to be an issue for now.
Now, Ray, still with MPs, the justice minister's name was used in a recent online scam. Tell me more about that.
Well, yeah, Judy Wilson-Raybould, Canada's justice minister, called in the RCMP to investigate. Her office told the Globe and Mail that some fraudsters created some fake accounts, fake email accounts, a fake LinkedIn account as well, in her name, all in an effort to solicit some cash from her constituents in the Vancouver area. They say they became aware after some people alerted them about suspicious communications that they received in the form of emails and messages through LinkedIn. The person apparently purporting to be Canada's justice minister was asking for donations for Canada, to help Canada win a seat at the UN Security Council sometime in the next few years. There was no hacking involved, just some fake accounts. So that's yet another reminder to be very careful when people ask you for money. Make sure that you're really dealing with a person that apparently is at the other end of the keyboard here.
Prime Minister Justin Trudeau delivered yet another formal apology. And Ray, this one was almost 80 years in the making.
Yeah, he apologized to people who died following the incident of the MS St. Louis. Now, this is a ship that left Europe in 1939, just as the Second World War was getting underway in Europe. Most people on board were German Jewish passengers, 907 of them. They were seeking refuge in North America. The captain first took the ship to Cuba, then to the United States. They were denied the possibility to dock there, so they tried their luck in Halifax. And the Canadian Prime Minister at the time, Mackenzie King, wouldn't allow the ship to dock in Nova Scotia. So what ended up happening is the ship had to go back to Europe, where some 254 of the passengers ended up dying in the Holocaust. So very sad story. So on Wednesday afternoon, the Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, rose in the House of Commons to deliver a formal apology. He said, and I quote, "We are sorry for the callousness of Canada's response. We are sorry for not apologizing sooner." It was a very moving moment because some of the survivors who are still alive today were there in the House of Commons, and obviously that formal apology by the Canadian Prime Minister meant a lot to them.
You know, sometimes some of our viewers ask me, they say, why are federal leaders apologizing for events that occurred 50, 80, or 100 years ago when they had nothing to do with it, that particular event? And we live in different times back then compared to where we live today.
Yeah, that's a fair question. But obviously, when the Prime Minister delivers a formal apology like Mr. Trudeau did this week, he does so not on his own behalf. It's on behalf of the government of Canada. I mean, this is what in the case of the MS St. Louis, it was a decision made by the Prime Minister at the time, so a Canadian government decision. So the Prime Minister of the day delivers that apology on behalf of the Canadian state. And obviously, it wasn't the first time that Justin Trudeau apologized formally this way since he's become prime minister. It was the fourth time. He's already delivered apologies for the Komagata Maru, which was another ship carrying refugees to Canada, this one in 1914, that was denied access on the West Coast. He also apologized to the LGBTQ community a couple of years ago, and also more recently for the hanging of 6 Native chiefs, Native leaders in British Columbia. This is something that happened more than 150 years ago. He delivered a formal apology to them in the House of Commons, to those particular Native communities. And then last week, he actually traveled to British Columbia to deliver the same apology, this time in person.
Ray, federal NDP leader Jagmeet Singh, who is still waiting for a by-election to be called in Burnaby, BC, so he can win a seat, said something a little controversial. He says he does not see the relevance of the monarchy. Where's this coming from?
Yeah, they were talking about the issues pertaining to Canada's former Canadian Governor General Adrienne Clarkson, and her expense, the fact that she's expended so much money, over $200,000 each year, pretty much since she left office back in 2005, according to the National Post. So they were talking about that in an interview with CTV. And then Mr. Singh said that he doesn't see the relevance of Canada's ties to the British monarchy. He also said that he doesn't think that most Canadians do. The last survey that I saw on the matter, I think, was about 15 months ago, and it said that Canadian opinion was pretty much split on that issue, pretty much 50-50. Now, Mr. Singh said that's his personal view, but this is not something that he intends, he says, to do anything about. You have to know that for Canada to sever its ties to the British monarchy, you'd have to reopen the Constitution. So that'd be a whole can of worms. I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon, probably not in our lifetime, Hal.
And we'll have to change the $20 bills as well. I mean, come
on. So many things we'd have to change, yeah.
Right. Ray, the official signing of the new trade deal between Canada, the U.S., and Mexico is not really shaping up to be a grandiose affair.
No, as a matter of fact, it's shaping up to be a pretty low-key affair, especially if the Americans keep their tariffs in place on Canada's steel and aluminum. Canadians are not happy that those weren't removed following the conclusion of the deal between Ottawa and Washington at the end of September. But the tariffs are still there, and according to what Canada's ambassador to Washington told the CBC this week, if those tariffs aren't removed, when the time comes to actually sign the deal, maybe at the end of this month, Canada's not going to send its prime minister to the ceremony. They don't want to see Justin Trudeau alongside Donald Trump, the American president, flashing smiles for the cameras. They're actually thinking right now, we're told, about sending Canada's foreign affairs minister, who is the lead on that issue, or some junior officials. And they're saying that would go a long way to communicate Canada's displeasure at those tariffs still being there. There was a rumor last Friday, I believe, to the fact that those tariffs would be removed just in time for the midterm elections in the States. But we know now that was just a rumor. It didn't happen. The tariffs are still there.
Now, speaking of the U.S. midterms, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is again treading a little lightly with the United States around the midterm elections, Ray.
Yeah, absolutely. He does everything to avoid criticizing Donald Trump. His spin the night after the midterm was to rejoice at the high number of women who were elected to office in the United States. The prime minister said it was probably a record. But yeah, once again, he gave an interview earlier in the week to CNN, and it was remarkable. He was asked many questions about Donald Trump, his relationship with the American presidents. He was asked at one point, do you trust Donald Trump? And his answer was, I trust Canadians. So he was dancing around many of those questions. He's doing everything in his power, once again, to avoid criticizing the American president in any way, shape, or form.
Ray, Ottawa outlined some interesting new targets this week for reducing poverty in Canada. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, the Family's Minister, Jean-Yves Duclos, tabled a bill earlier this week in the House of Commons. It sets targets for reducing poverty by 20% below 2015 levels by the year 2020 and 50% by the year 2030. The government says 4.2 million Canadians were considered low income back in 2015. So the targets are public. How will the government go about eliminating poverty in Canada? That remains a big question because there aren't any new measures in this legislation for reducing poverty, although they're creating a new National Advisory Council on the matter. But yeah, the target is there. The question is how they're going to achieve it.
November 11th obviously is a time to reflect and think about those who sacrificed and fought for our freedoms that we enjoy today. And our Prime Minister Justin Trudeau will be marking Remembrance Day in France.
That's right. He's going to be spending the weekend in France because, as you probably know, this year, 2018, marks the 100th anniversary of the end of the First World War back in 1918. So the Prime Minister will be taking part in commemorative ceremonies overseas. Then he's going to attend the Paris Peace Forum, which is a new initiative by the French president. They say they will bring together political, economic, and civil society leaders. Donald Trump is expected to be there, although we're not expecting a face-to-face meeting between him and Prime Minister Trudeau. And then the Prime Minister will go to Asia later on next week to take part in the Asia-Pacific Summit. So maybe he's going to have a meeting with the American president then. So it's going to be a busy week for Prime Minister Trudeau. Not so much here on Parliament Hill because Parliament will be on a break week.
Our parliamentary reporter, Ray Fillion, joining me once again from Ottawa. Thanks so much, Ray.
My pleasure, Hal.
Previously on Fighting for Ezekiel.
911 emergency, do you fire, please fire ambulance.
Hi, yes, my son's not breathing.
By Thursday, they were diagnosing Ezekiel with having brain death.
There was no logs of anything. There was no lab reports. We've asked for them repeatedly.
We may have never even discovered that our son had gone for over 8 minutes without oxygen in the ambulance.
He was very sick. He was septic with whatever bacteria caused his meningitis.
Her report would have went as such if she was the one that was doing it, that he died because of medical misadventure.
Well, one of the dangers, and this has been something that's talked about by a lot of defense lawyers throughout the years, is where judges pretend to be doctors.
And now the conclusion of Fighting for Ezekiel, a Bridge City News exclusive.
It has been a fascinating week hearing differing opinions on this case. Is the Crown correct in their view that the Stephans were negligent by not taking Ezekiel to the doctor sooner? Was it simply a case of loving parents who simply did not realize their son was much more ill than he appeared to be? In today's final episode, we will hear from medical experts and a lawyer who shares his legal opinion as to why the Supreme Court of Canada granted a retrial to the Stephans. We will also receive final thoughts from David and Colette on their journey. We begin, however, with our legal expert, Ari Goldkind. Ari, I understand the Crown needed to prove that the parents made a marked departure from what a reasonable parent would do in their situation. How do courts define marked departure? And where's the line? At what point are parents required to take their child in to see a doctor before being held liable?
What the case stands for, which is why the parents are getting a new trial, is it has to be something that is very clear that by not getting your child into an ambulance, into your car, you are really taking a gamble with their life rather than making a decision that under the circumstances, another reasonably prudent parent might have done the same thing. So what the Supreme Court and the dissenting judge have said, if we had 50 parents sitting around in a focus group and the symptom that we can make one up was presented, it can't be enough that 48 parents would have said, maybe we would have done the same thing. It has to be that the other 50 parents would have said, are you crazy? Of course we would have had a warning sign that the child is going to emergency.
Dr. Tina Tan is an infectious disease physician at Lurie Children's Hospital of Chicago. Dr. Tan, what are the symptoms of bacterial meningitis? In your opinion, would parents who were not medically trained be able to recognize these symptoms as being bacterial meningitis?
They may not be able to recognize that the child had bacterial meningitis, but they should recognize that the child is actually quite ill. So normally with bacterial meningitis, children or infants or toddlers should have high fevers. They can be very irritable or they can be very sleepy. If they're old enough to say their head hurts, they will complain that their head hurts. They will have some neck stiffness and maybe some back stiffness. And I know that I read somewhere that they tried to put this child in a car seat and he was very stiff and it was very difficult to put him in the car seat. So that could have been an indication that he was already having some meningeal irritation that resulted in that stiffness. A lot of times they can have vomiting. So, I mean, those are things that I think, if parents see this, it's very much out of the ordinary for a normal child to do this, and it's something that they need to seek medical attention for.
Well, that is one of the strange things about this case. There was debate in the courtroom as to exactly how stiff Ezekiel's back was. The parents argued that it was very minimal and that their son was showing mild symptoms of sickness and that he only had a fever on the first day. Terry Mainders, the RN who checked in on the toddler the day before he died, did not find any alarming symptoms other than the tiredness. The family said even though Ezekiel was still playing, he was lethargic at times. So it becomes a real challenge to sort this out. The question we all need to ask ourselves is, what would the average parent do in a case like this?
I worked in emergency for years, and I saw parents that brought their children in for things that were not necessary for medical treatment, like mosquito bites or toothaches that weren't an emergency, but yet they brought them there. And then I've seen others that were brought in that were thought to be less than fatal, and 2 days later you find out that child is passed on, or that person is passed on because of something that was missed.
Again, how can parents who don't have any medical training sort out what is serious and what is not? Dr. Tan, your thoughts?
I think the question is, how much of a change from normal was this? I mean, you said, yeah, he had some decreased activity, but he was still playing. But was it a significant decrease in activity, or, was it a significant decrease in interest in things? I mean, I think it's all relative. And, I wasn't there to see them and you weren't there to see them. So I think, it's very hard to say based upon what individuals are telling you if you don't know what the baseline is and what you're comparing it to.
If we can have a do-over in this tragic story, I think both sides truly wish that Ezekiel had been taken to the doctor much sooner. But the question remains, should everyday parents actually be sent to jail if they make a mistake in a situation such as this? 2 lower court decisions said yes, but since then, the Supreme Court of Canada unanimously granted a retrial to the Stephens. One of the reasons given was that the judge's instructions to the jury were confusing and misleading. Ari, how and why does this sort of thing happen?
You're giving lay people 300-400 page charges, and it gets extremely confusing for them because it sort of poisons the mind as to how you approach the question, which is, are the accused people in front of you essentially criminals? But what's critical here of what the Supreme Court also did is it's not just the length of the charge. And remember, as I give this answer, it's very hard to overturn a jury verdict unless, and this is a big point, the jury charge was unfair. And what the Supreme Court did is they adopted the decision of the dissenting judge in Alberta. In other words, 2 judges liked the jury's decision. 1 judge thought it was improper. Why? Because the trial judge stacked, and I'm using that word specifically, stacked the charge to look biased and skewed, and with a wink, wink, nudge, nudge, to the jury to say that trial judge really thought the parent should be convicted. So under the surface of all this, even though the words confusing or too long were used, what the dissenting judge hammered the trial judge on was how unfair and biased his charge to the jury was. And if the Supreme Court gets a whiff of that and thinks that, that is one of the extraordinarily unusual and rare times a judgment will be sent back for a new trial.
We asked registered nurse and Colette's friend Terry Mainders for some final thoughts on this case.
I understand not wanting to run to the hospital for everything. Did I have concerns with Colette taking Zeke to the hospital? I was concerned that she wouldn't when I felt that he was sick enough she needed to. And I expressed that to her. I said, I strongly advise you go to the hospital. She knew I was not there to diagnose or I was there to help her out as a friend. I'm of course it's a very tragic ending, and it's sad to watch Dave and Colette have to go through what they've gone through to get to this point. However, I really believe that Dave and Colette did their very best. They did what they thought was best for their child, and I think for any of us to be bullied into trying to force things upon us that we might not believe in or might not agree with, or that the research doesn't necessarily even support. I think that that's wrong. I think you can't take away our rights as parents, and trying hard to make the choices for our children for their best interest.
The public view on this case is certainly divided, but whatever side you land on, we have to acknowledge that the Steffens do love their children, and they did love Ezekiel. These ongoing court cases have taken a significant toll both financially and personally on the Steffen family. Paul Arthur sat down with David and Colette to gather some final thoughts.
Have you ever thought, you know what, this is too hard, let's just do our community service, our house arrest, and move on?
I've never felt that way because we didn't do anything wrong. We were doing what we thought normal parents would do, that when there was a crisis, an emergency, that we did what we were supposed to. We called, we trusted the ambulance.
Did you feel like you're taking one for the team, if you will, the parental rights team, saying, hey, you know what, if we don't stand up here, their parents could lose some rights?
Absolutely.
That's been the motivating factor. It would have been a lot easier to just, like you said, just throw it in, do the time.
Your people of faith, how much of a part has that played for you?
A big part.
It's been what's carried us through, really.
Absolutely.
It has. Without that, there would be, a lot of dark times ahead of us, and the past would have been just filled with dark. But that abiding faith that we have, and that we recognize that that what we're doing here is helping to uphold parental rights, people's choice to natural health supplements that's coming under attack. That's nothing new to us. We've been involved in that for 2 decades now. Is that, at the end of the day, we're doing something to benefit and bless God's children through this, as painful as it is.
Well, and we don't want any parent to have to experience and go through what we've had to go through. It's heart-wrenching for a mother, and I would never wish this upon any other mom.
Yeah. Now, you believe you have been treated unfairly and unjustly in this case. Have you been able to extend forgiveness? That's a hard thing to do, isn't it?
It's the most important thing to do.
Yeah.
It was absolutely necessary for our own peace. The benefactors of forgiveness are those who forgive, not those who receive the forgiveness, though it can be beneficial to them as well. But the greatest benefit is for us to be able to let go of that and get rid of that hatred and that anger. Otherwise, we would have become really dark, bitter, cynical individuals over it. We would have allowed that hatred to consume us. And, for us to be, the husband and wife that we need to be, and the parents that we need to be, we had to learn to forgive. And we had to learn how to forgive real quickly. We were kind of just thrown into it with all of the hatred, with the cover-up. There's so many people that we could have held a grudge against, and we couldn't.
Okay. Now, the Supreme Court of Canada has since, again, quashed your convictions, so I'm sure that's a relief. Unanimously granted you a retrial. Any thoughts on the outcome of that trial? What do you want to see come out of that?
The truth.
She both summed it up exactly, the truth to come out. With all of the investigation that's taken place into the medical files and the discovery that there's a lot more to this case than we were ever made aware of, we just want that to be able to come out. We want to get all of the disclosure that we still haven't got, and so we're hoping, and this is supposed to be a venue where we have entitlement to that disclosure, and so we're hoping that we actually get it this time around, and that the full truth comes out, and that we truly learn what took place in regard to Ezekiel's passing. Because as parents, we want that as closure, but it's necessary also for justice. to understand what led up to his passing so that, you know, a fair judgment can be made. So that's what we're hoping for.
David and Colette, thank you so much for sharing your story.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The new trial for the Steffens will take place in June of 2019, this time by judge alone and no jury. Much of the debate centers around who is responsible for the health and well-being of our children. There's a place for government to step in at times to defend the vulnerable. But on the other hand, at what point does the government overreach and with that undermine the rights of parents? Here's Miracle Channel CEO Leon Fontaine with some final thoughts and perspective.
There are things that seem to be going on behind the scenes that we're unaware of. But it's very concerning to me as a parent, and it should be to all of us, that the media has an ability to make a decision on a story and then to take you down that road. And I think that many of us need to wake up in this area and recognize that just because something is printed or something appears on a news station does not mean at all that that is truth. And so we need to learn to question the things that are in print, the things that we hear and see, and make sure that we have all the facts. And so I want to encourage you to not make rash judgments as a Christian, as a believer, but go after more facts. Continue, for example, to watch Miracle Channel and the things that we are producing to help you understand the situations that are happening around us. As we look at this issue of how involved should government get in our families, I totally understand, as a person who has seen many situations where children need to be protected from a drug-addicted parent or something that's really wrong, where they're being hurt, and this is awful and they need to be removed. I understand thinking this situation through. But at the same time, parents who are sharp, who are smart, who do what they can to help their kids and to look after their children, I don't want the government encroaching a lot into my rights as a parent. Right now we're dealing with situations here in Alberta and across Canada where the government is trying to tell us what to teach our children as far as what is morality, what is right, what is wrong. And I think we need to be very aware of it. There'll be more things coming up on that topic in the future. Another one that is touched on in this case is this issue of vaccinations. And the fact that the government's trying to mandate it, is trying to make it mandatory that parents have to vaccinate their children. Yet on our programs here at the Miracle Channel, we've had doctors and scientists who literally say there is so much proof, there is a body of evidence that says that there's a lot of problems in the vaccination model. What should we do as parents who care, as thinking men and women? Well, let's keep watching. Let's be aware of what our government is doing. You and I should be following all the things that are going on in our government as they begin to legislate, or if they begin to take away our rights, our privileges. Keep watching. Be aware. Get the information that you need. Be praying as a believer for our leaders. There's great leaders in our governments that love God, and even those who don't know God yet that have wisdom. Let's pray. And as we do this, here at the Miracle Channel, we want to continue to bring you reports. We want to bring information. We want to talk things through so that as believers across this great nation, we can operate in wisdom and even get involved right away when something needs to be done. Be praying for David and Colette, this family, this situation, and we'll continue to follow as well what is going on there. God bless you.